My name is Greg Peterson, and I'm an attorney in town, and this is 2023. So you're going to have to do a little suspended reality here and pretend, if you will, that we are January 18th, 1938. And I have been assigned by the Jamestown Evening Journal to interview the retired mayor for many, many years of the City of Jamestown, Samuel Carlson. So with this in mind, backdrop, drum roll, 1938, winds of war going on in Europe. We're here in Jamestown in a special studio with the mayor, Sam Carlson. If I may refer to you as Mr. Mayor.
You can call me Sam.
Sam? Sure, okay. Sam, this is the 18th, and on the 16th, 2 days ago, the city came out in mass to celebrate your tremendous public service to the City of Jamestown. And one of those who was very articulate, and I was taking lots of notes, but I wished I had taken more, was one Robert Jackson who came up from Washington to be one of many commemorating your public service. What was your relationship to Robert Jackson?
Bob and I were good friends. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we had a cordial and respectful professional relationship. Now, he and I had one major passion, arguing. Both Bob and I were debaters, and we established this relationship through many sorts of clubs and also professional associations. For instance, the Saturday Night Club, you may know about the Saturday Night Club meeting on Saturday nights in Jamestown to discuss issues, important issues, always preceded by a large banquet. So Bob and I would always talk and argue. Now, he was a Democrat, and I was in a sort of a pretend Republican. So, although we shared some good times together, whenever he comes back to Jamestown now, we meet, and he's a good fellow, and he's got a long way to go still.
Your relationship with many goes back many years, in Jamestown, of which you are a native.
That's right.
Can you share a little bit about, for our readers, because I'll be doing this, as a native, something of your parents? What maybe caused them to immigrate?
Well, they came over in 1867. At that point, there was a famine in Sweden. Crops had failed for many years, and there was a large emigration to the States, and they came over in 67. I was born the next year in 1868, and we lived at that time, we lived in the beginning on English Hill. I suppose some of you know where that is in Jamestown. If you follow Willard Street to the top, it's way up high where today the reservoir is. And you can look down over the city, and when I was a young man, a child, I spent much time looking down over the city, fascinated, and looking at it as my domain. So I have many memories, actually, of growing up in those early years. Some very fond, some not so fond. I actually was taken out of school at the age of 10 to work in the alpaca mills And I was one of many children who were put to work in those days today what are the woolen mills. I didn't have much formal education, although I did attend elementary school on Allen Street. There was a school there on Allen Street, and at that time, Professor Samuel Love was superintendent. He was a strict man. Matter of fact, he would circulate among the elementary schools with a ruler. And those recalcitrant students who, in one way or another, were being deficient, felt it on the hand with the ruler. But we all did like Professor Love. The other thing I remember about English Hill in those early days was playing baseball, because I was a fan of baseball. And it was it was sort of bending the rules, because we played on Saturday and we had to find a spot outside at that point, the village limits, because there was an ordinance requiring or denying the playing of any sort of sport on Sundays, and that's when we played. So that's what I remember. But also now, you can imagine, any of you who have been up on English Hill or Swede Hill, they are side by side, coming down the hill in the winter in the snow was no easy task. And returning to home on English Hill also was no easy task. My mother died when I was an infant.
Her name was?
Charlotta. And I only know her from a photograph. But my father did remarry after 3 years, and so the mother that I knew was my stepmother.
Now, you had siblings, and what were they, and what were their names?
Well, there was Lawrence, D. Lawrence, he was called. We called him Larry Lawrence. And there was Charles and a sister whose, I believe her name was Rosa. I'd have to study up on that.
So with the siblings growing up in Jamestown early years, what was your impressions of Jamestown itself?
Well, I was very interested in the look of the city, particularly looking down from English Hill. And I felt, right from an early age, this is my realm. Because I could see there was energy. It seemed to be a great deal of energy going on there, and I wanted to be part of it. But working in the alpaca mills taught me quite a bit. What went on there was, oftentimes young children needed to work in the mills because of their nimble little fingers in untangling threads. And their parents oftentimes worked for, maybe one or the other of the growing furniture factories. And a lot of the Swedes had a lot were very, very good craftsmen. I know a lot of the parents of the children who worked in the alpaca mills worked for the cane seat chair factory, caning the seats at 25 cents or so per seat on piecework. But I started very early introducing myself to what was going on in Jamestown. For instance, I joined the YMCA I started out there 14 years old, and that's where I got a good bit of education. And I have been so involved with the YMCA all my life. That's a library filled with volumes on civic matters, and that's where I began my interest in municipal civic matters.
Like municipal lighting.
Oh yeah, like municipal lighting.
And its efficacy. While growing up, was book learning something that was important or in your family, or did you find that externally, where you were able to get to libraries and things like that?
Well, it was not an easy thing for my father to manage, particularly before he remarried. And it was, we were quite poor. And my learning came largely from the YMCA library. Eventually, I went into the public schools and got what education I could. But I would say that I learned more in the YMCA than I did in the public schools.
Talk about, what was your journey in the public schools? What, your grade schools, was there junior high? What was at that early time in Jamestown?
Well, after leaving the alpaca mills, I was in the elementary school. It was on Allen Street, so it was down the street from down the hill from English Hill, and then into Jamestown High School.
When did you graduate from Jamestown High School?
Well, I was born in 1868, so that would make me, let's see, it would be 1887,
Okay.
or 6, I don't remember exactly the date.
You're well known for your interest in politics and your public service, but there had to be a beginning. At what point, what was that aha moment?
There definitely was a beginning, and I managed at the age of 21 to become the secretary for Mr. George Martin, furniture owner here in Jamestown, and this was about the year 1890. And Mr. Martin had been interested in a municipal electric plant, and he met with a number of prominent figures in Jamestown, regularly in an agency called the Ethical Society, and I somehow managed to become his secretary because of my interest in city affairs. And Mr. Martin wrote many editorials, many letters to the newspapers of the day, advocating for a municipal light plant, and that's where I began my advocation as well. And Mr. Martin also he lobbied for me. He promoted me for my first entrance into politics as an alderman on Ward 4 on English Hill.
Now, we learned that in 1891, the municipal plant was created. Do you remember those early days of conversation with Mr. Martin and kind of the background of what led to that?
I certainly remember them. I remember them as very, well, there was very much opposition from private sources and money men, much opposition, and it took a good long time before there was enough city backing for the lighting plant to get it up and running the way it is running now. It took like 30 years. So this advocation went on and on and on, and after that plant was established in 1891, the Common Council took over the running of it and kept it for 15 or so years with very, very little activity associated with it. So, when I was elected that first time in 1893 as the alderman, I immediately put forth resolutions in the council advocating for a lighting plant. And originally they weren't received well, but eventually a bond issue was voted on and money raised didn't go very far at that point. But that's how, and from that time, I was reelected over and over as alderman until finally I became mayor. From that time, I had advocated for this municipal lighting plant, but not only the plant, but other utilities in Jamestown, particularly the water system. So I became well-known for my advocacy of municipal control of utilities.
So, you mentioned, Sam, that though created in 1891, it really was not really up and running and efficient to the extent you would have liked to have seen it for a few years. Why was that?
Well, it supplied the electricity for the street lighting, and that's about as far as it went. There was competition, and from private, there was a private company, an electric company at that point that certainly was not happy about a municipal company in competition.
Okay.
This was not owned, but the president of that company, it was known as the Goki Company. Mr. Noah Goki was a prominent citizen in Jamestown, owned a furniture factory on 3rd Street, was also an alderman from the 1st Ward. You know, they called the 1st Ward in those days the Silk Stocking Ward. So he was a very prominent and well-educated man. As soon as I became alderman and started advocating for the plant, the municipal light plant, he approached me and he said, "Sam, you don't know what you're getting into. You know, I know what it is to be to produce and sell electricity. Leave it alone, Sam," he told me. I said, "No, I'm not going to leave it alone," and I never did.
So, plus he, interestingly enough, being an alderman and kind of had a built-in conflict of interest in voting against any potential competitor.
Well, I suppose, yeah, but he was a businessman, you know. You don't want competition when you've got virtually a monopoly.
Did
So
you?
all along, that was the opposition between private concerns who are in it for the bottom line, and for me, it's for trying to supply to the citizens of Jamestown low rates and public control that would reduce taxes and lower rates on the sale of electricity as well as water.
So you felt competition, in sort of in capital sense, would be the best effect for the citizens. That there would be at least
The
some.
best effect for me would be, and turned out to be, municipal control of utilities in Jamestown. The prices for, like I say, for water and for electricity. When I became mayor in 1908, electricity was selling for 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Years later, when the plant was up and running, it was down to like 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So we saved a lot of money for the citizens of Jamestown in the sale of electricity.
So you're a relatively young alderman in 1908. You decide to step it up a notch to run for mayor. What was that first campaign like for this younger Sam Carlson?
Well, I was encouraged, and I also had energy. So the city of Jamestown was my kingdom, my realm, and so I was encouraged to run for mayor. And I ran against, there were 3 opponents to me in that election. One of them being Oscar Price, former Jamestown mayor, the first mayor of Jamestown. And through most of my campaigns, the media was sort of not happy with me. But Oscar Price and an alderman by the name of Swanson, and again the the campaign was all about municipal ownership of utilities versus private ownership. So I became well-known immediately. After becoming an alderman, I became well-known immediately for that advocation. And it stood me well because I was elected mayor for 20 years after that. I was re-elected until 1927. The election in 1927, I was defeated, but I had 20 years as mayor before that first defeat.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, that's a long run.
Yeah, well, what I attribute it to mostly is that I believe that the electorate felt that I was not a politician. And part of my platform in 1908 and throughout was nonpartisanship, so that I did not embrace the title of the designation of as Republican, although I took it on in the beginning because everybody in Jamestown was a Republican. So I did take it on, but I did not embrace party politics at all. And I think that folks in Jamestown understood me to be sympathetic to the common person's interest. You know, I've been called a lot of things: radical, socialist, visionary, demagogue. I've been called all kinds of things, but I kept managing to win elections.
Why would somebody call you a socialist? Did you deem that to be a badge of honor, or did you deem that to be something?
I was never offended by it at all. Well, I was called a communist as well. You know? It's politics. That's what it is. All along in a campaign, there's going to be name calling and issue opposition. I didn't care. You know, I was never angry, even in defeat. I was never angry because I always kept my eye on the welfare of the citizens of Jamestown. And I think that the electorate really felt that about me, and that's why I was able to win so many elections.
During that time period, not only winning many elections, but there was competition for the municipal, with the municipal light plant. Draw a little bit of a blank since it's now a few years ago since the acquisition, but Lockport was in it, Lockport, Ontario, something like that.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
It's a great story about the success, I would say, of getting the municipal light plant up and running and supplying electricity to Jamestown. Now, I mentioned the Goki plant. And Mr. Goki decided that he would sell. The city had an option on buying the Goki plant. And Mr. Goki decided that, he would be willing to sell, but at a price which the council was not willing to pay. And so I was willing to pay the price. The figure was $90,000. And I believed in my colleagues in municipal utility ownership also believed that the $90,000 was certainly reasonable, considering it would buy out the Goki franchise. And so the city would own the franchise for supplying the electricity. So Mr. Goki decided he would sell. The council would not approve the figure, and almost the next day after the vote defeating the sale, it turned out that Mr. Goki sold for $90,000 his electric plant to the Jamestown Street Railway, which was owned by the Broadhead brothers. So, and they bought the electricity, the electric plant, ran it for a few years, and then sold it out to the Niagara, Lockport, and Ontario Power Company. Sold it to them for $400,000. The Broadheads were very, very good businessmen.
Now Niagara owns it, they're in competition with City of Jamestown.
They own all the distribution facilities.
Was there somewhat of a division of commercial use of the, so they have the municipal, with that municipal plant, was that principally residential, while
The municipal
Niagara
plant was doing the lighting in the city mostly. And my vision, I was called a visionary in a derogatory way many times, but my vision was for the plant to supply the electricity not only to the street lighting, but to all the homes and all the businesses. That's what it does now. But there was certainly a great deal of opposition from the Niagara Power Company to our owning the electricity, the production of electricity in Jamestown. Matter of fact, Mr. Cody, who was the president of the Niagara Company, came to see me in the mayor's office. And I remember the date of this very well, 1926. And I had been reelected as president for so many years that that he knew that it was on it was on the radar of the citizens of Jamestown that who I was and what were my policies. And he knew that there was going to be a problem holding on to all the electricity generating process in Jamestown. He came into my office, it was in 1926, and he came in with what appeared to be a very, very valuable proposition. Since the Niagara plant owned the distribution facilities for electricity, he came in and proposed that he would supply the electricity for Jamestown at the same price that the current municipal plant was supplying it. He would supply it at that same price, and he would also add on some other sort of benefits in the distribution. Now, at that point, we in the Board of Public Works were planning on spending $300,000 to upgrade the machinery for our plant. That was all prepared to do that. And Mr. Cody said, well, okay, if we in Niagara supply the electricity for you, you won't have to pay that $300,000. The problem was, he said that we will have a 10-year period which we will keep the program as it is, but after that it becomes our program. And I said to Mr. Cody, now that sounds like a very appropriate, very, very enticing sort of a deal, but here's what will happen, and I know it and you know it, that after 10 years, our facility will be defunct, and you will have a monopoly here, and our prices will go up. And so we refused that offer. And eventually then, what happened was, okay, when I got defeated in 1927 for mayor, the reason I got defeated was because the big the big issue in almost every election is the one of taxation. And one party is in favor of decreasing taxation, of not allowing any increase in taxation. I got defeated at that time, and Mr. Lars Larson won the mayoralty in that year. And what happened was the state taxing authority decided to upgrade the assessment in Jamestown. And so the entire campaign was all about the taxes being raised in Jamestown, and I was responsible. And so that was what the campaign was about. And so I got defeated for that election. Following election 2 years later, I was re-elected, and at that point, the Niagara Company knew all about me and what was going to be the policy here on out, and they agreed to sell. And they agreed to sell under the recommendation of Bob Jackson. Bob Jackson was their attorney, and that was one of our, debates.
So Bob Jackson was the attorney for Niagara.
Yeah.
And I believe there was I read where there were some rate case issues before the Public Service Commission that didn't quite get resolved, and they encouraged conversation. And Robert Jackson, working with a guy named Russell Rogerson, who was your attorney, saw the handwriting on the wall.
Absolutely. Bob Jackson, he told them right out, you're not going anywhere with this. You might as well sell. And they wanted $1 million. And some of you may know the name of Carl Peterson, a very prominent industrialist and engineer in Jamestown. And he was our board president of the Public Works, Board of Public Works. And he talked them down. He talked them down to $750,000, and they sold it for that price. Owning that distribution system and the ability to provide electricity in Jamestown was worth $400,000 a year. We had that $750,000 paid off in 3 years, no taxes raised, no bond issue. We paid it all off in 3 years. And it has never had a deficit. As a matter of fact, we have been able to generate enough revenue that we have surpluses used in the bank or mostly in U.S. securities for any necessary upgrades, or if inflation comes along, to try and keep away from raising taxes.
So here we are. You are now in a retirement after serving so many years in public service. How do you reflect on some of those accomplishments? Now, this municipal is probably, a municipal light plant is what you're well known for, but that was not the only stuff. There was paving, there was street paving, there was other municipal activities which were privately used, and you had a vision.
Well, there was a whole lot. I wanted, I was not only called a socialist, I was called a capitalist as well. I have no problem with competition among private concerns. As a matter of fact, I encourage competition, but in the area of utilities, I firmly believe that they are municipally owned, city-owned. There's better efficiency, and there is less chance of shenanigans, and the welfare of the community is paramount, and that's my concern. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned paving. because this is another example of the sort of the oppositional sort of issue between, now, when I was elected mayor, the paving was done by private contractors. As a matter of fact, when I was elected alderman, there was not a single street in Jamestown nor a sewer that was paved. The streets were not paved, there were no sewers. The streets were dirt. In the summertime, they were dusty. In the wintertime, in the fall, when it rained, they were totally muddy. You know, women in those days had those long dresses. They needed to cross those muddy streets. They didn't want to pull up those dresses. So, when I was elected alderman, contractors would sort of collude with certain aldermen from certain wards in, supplying money for their campaigns, and also expecting in return that they didn't look too close at what the contractors' bids were. And so the contractors were, and the expense of paving through private contractors was far higher than once the city, well, that was a battle too, getting rid of the contractors and the city taking over the paving and building of sewers.
I would be remiss as a journalist if I didn't ask about a specific meeting, because here we are, the winds of war, January 1938 today. That back in 1933, you were selected as part of a delegation to travel to Europe and to study municipal administrations. And there you actually met and spoke with Der Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler.
I did. I certainly did. That was 1933, and that was the second time that the election in 1933 was the second that I lost over my career, that I was defeated. And so that election was shortly after I returned from Europe. Now, that delegation was consisted of 17 citizens, including myself. Newspaper people, engineers, private citizens, and this was an initiative. This was sponsored by an organization called the Karl Schurz Foundation. Karl Schurz was a German immigrant, and actually Karl Schurz was a general in the Civil War on the Union side, but he assumed after the war, he assumed a number of prominent positions, both private and public, and the foundation was set up in his name. And so the foundation's purpose was to try and get American administrations, American folks in contact with particularly German administrators in administering cities. And so I was fortunate enough to be selected to go on that trip, and it was a wonderful trip. We were there for 6 weeks. And of course, now this was 1933, and this was the year that Mr. Hitler became the chancellor. I can remember very, very clearly, specifically, being told on the ship ride over by the members of the staff from the foundation that we are not to, under any circumstances, refer in any negative way to the Nazis. But I can remember my first sight of Adolf Hitler we had been invited to what was called a large concert in a large stadium. And you could see in the prominent seats, you could see the Fuhrer was sitting over there. And I took it upon myself to try and get a personal meeting with him. And I managed to do it. I mean, just in passing, sort of after the concert was over. I was allowed, he agreed to meet with me. He knew of the delegation and he agreed to meet. And so we met on the grounds. I had an interpreter with me. Well, I approached him and he was cordial, but he was autocratic even then, of course. And I remember clearly what he said to me. He said to me through the interpreter, he said, well, you can go back to your home and tell them all that you don't see dead bodies in the streets of Berlin. That's what he told me. So we all know the history of that, at least up until 1938. That's where we are.
So when you came back to Jamestown as a delegate to meet with the Chancellor, Hitler, how were you greeted by the citizenry?
They turned out in an extravagant display of affection. But I still was defeated after the election. And I can quite understand that. There were all kinds of parties and fetes and processions and big dinners and Bob Jackson, again, they're talking, Bob always would come back here for these types of celebrations. It was always good to see him, so. Big dinners in the Crystal Ballroom. The Crystal Ballroom was, Hotel Jamestown was maybe 30 years old at the time, maybe not quite that old, and it was sumptuous, and 400 people show up, including you. So
media has to be there.
Yeah. So a big procession then from a big sort of parade with a lot of dignitaries in cars heading toward my brother's house, Lawrence's house on Forest Avenue, where the whole large crowd out in the yard, and there I am called upon to give my thanks. And I told them what, sincerely, I told the folks who showed up there that this reception that I had here back in Jamestown exceeded anything that I experienced anywhere else in Europe or in my career. It was just a wonderful thing. I was so flattered. They called me Mayor Emeritus, the only one who ever, in Jamestown's history and probably in the entire country's history, with that designation, Mayor Emeritus.
You proudly, during your reign, did some other things as well. There was the establishment of a city-owned hospital that now serves about 4,000 patients every year. The elimination of railroad grade crossing and the construction of the 3rd and 6th Street bridges.
That's right.
A workable new charter and nonpartisan elections, which has given us citizen rather than partisan city government. A local law approving and authorizing to acquire condemnation of properties for the gas plant as well. And then it goes on from there. Is there any one or two things that, as you reflect on your many years of public service, that you feel most proud of?
Well, what I am most proud of is the success of the electric light plant and the waterworks. Those two have benefited the citizens of Jamestown certainly in monetary ways, and they're efficiently and safely run. So, and the other thing that I'm very pleased with that, and proud of, throughout my career, my political career, was my ability, well, probably wasn't an ability, I was just blessed with an abundance of practical and efficient and businesslike and folks with high integrity that I had the ability to appoint to certain positions. Carl Peterson being one, of course, and many, too many to name.
I think I'm going to conclude with something that our Jamestown Journal said way back when, 1894, February 21st, 1894, that said, dealing with the public improvements that were during the controversial stages of the municipal plan. And we said at the Journal, the man who worked in and out of season, to whom a large share of the credit is due, is Samuel A. Carlson. His sledgehammer arguments fell in all places at the right time, and no one seemed to be able to stand up against him. He was armed with an array of facts and figures, and so well grounded in his position that it was impossible to shake him. Does that sound like you?
I have been flattered far and beyond my deserving, and I can only say that it has been a privilege and an honor for me to serve the citizens of Jamestown for so many years, and it's a community that there is no other community I would rather have been associated with for my life.
Thank you, Sam. I look forward to putting this article together, and it will be above the fold. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.